All right, welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 35, and we're going to talk about the woke military and how this whole wokeism phenomena is teaching bad discrimination. That is, how to discriminate badly or in a less than optimal way. So, first of all, what is woke? Woke is, in case you were sleeping under a rock for the last 20 years, woke or wokeism, woke culture is that, expression that says you are awake, you're not asleep, you know what's going on, you have a more enlightened and um, more knowledgeable take on the problems of society, and so therefore you know what the solutions are. So this mentality has been floating around in the humanities for quite some time now and has now spread. So it's sort of like a tumor that, like your appendix, it's problematic, it's infected, it needs to be taken out, but it pops, right? Your appendix explodes, and so then it spreads all of that bacteria, all that nasty stuff all throughout your abdominal cavity. Well, that's kind of what happened with this whole woke culture. So it's been festering within the College of Liberal Arts and the Humanities for quite some time. And then I guess it reached critical mass and it just basically popped, and now it's all over society. And it has reached the military. I mean, a lot of people could argue that it has reached the military years ago, but it's now much more overt now. And so now you have DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion classes in the military. And the most recent bill, well, there are many bills that are coming through Congress, but one of them would be the National Defense Authorization Act 2023. I guess it was up for renewal, and it was part of this whole budgeting nonsense that we see here in the United States. I don't know how many billions of $800 billion, maybe the National Defense Authorization Act alone. It's a budgeting bill that that tries to address three things. I looked it up. And what's really interesting is that the very first paragraph assumes the growing threat from other countries like China and Russia. And I thought that was kind of interesting because my subjective view of what's going on in the world is that the United States is creating a lot of these problems in and all around the world. For example, China pretty much produces most of the things that America consumes. So how can they be selling stuff to us at the same time agitating for war? Is it possible that people in the United States, particularly in the military and certain parts of the government, where they see that their strategy against China is failing, whatever that strategy was, and so now they have to sort of promote this aggressive stance so that it reverses the trend where they start losing ground to the Chinese. I mentioned this before about trade deficits, right? So the Chinese have all these dollars. What do you do with the dollars that are depreciating because of the inflation here in the United States? Well, you got to buy stuff that you can buy with dollars, and that would be property, companies, farms, factories in the United States, because that's all you can buy with dollars. And so that's what's happening. And a lot of people get upset about that. And no one puts it together that the reason why they're doing this is because they're trying to unload all of these dollars. And the only place that you can spend these dollars is the United States. Okay, so that part is missing. Nevertheless, the growing threat from other countries necessitates this massive National Defense Authorization Act. And it has three prongs, right? Supports the objectives of the National Defense Strategy. Number two, strengthens the all-volunteer force and improves the quality of life of the men and women of the total force, their families, and DoD, Department of Defense, civilian contractors and personnel. Third, it provides the United States military services and combatant commanders with the resources needed to carry out the national defense strategy and outcompete, deter, and if necessary, prevail against near-peer adversaries. Those are the three things that the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, is supposed to do. But again, it's like $800 billion. And so they sneak in all kinds of stuff in there. So part of the national defense apparently is sending cluster bombs to the Ukraine, cluster bombs which are declared illegal in over 100, like 120 countries or something like that. And so they're sending it to the Ukraine primarily because the United States has ran out of munitions. There's nothing else to send, so let's send these illegal cluster bombs to the Ukraine. And they keep saying that it has a low failure rate, but no, the fail rate is very high. And so it really bothers me, and I have to mention it. So all these politicians, they always talk about how, you have to care about the kids. It's all about the kids. And everyone knows, pretty much everyone in the world, except the United States, that where these cluster bombs are used, the people who are most often injured, maimed, dismembered, are little children who pick up these little bomblets because they think they're little balls and they want to play catch with them or something of that sort. So anyway, cluster bombs are included in this, and also teaching woke ideology, right? That white people are all racists, and apparently trans people can be great soldiers, etc. So because of all of this, and safe spaces with pronouns, the proper pronouns, whatever. So because of all of this, however, as much as they're spending all this money, recruitment is down. It is the lowest in 50 years. What happened 50 years ago? The Vietnam War. And no one wants to join the military if you know you're going to ship out right away and have to fight in Vietnam, which everyone knows was not a nice war. So no one wanted to join the military. Recruitment was very, very low 50 years ago, and we have exceeded those lows. In other words, we're lower than we were back then. It's not simply because of the perpetual war, but also all this other ideology, including mandatory vaccines, including getting the cervasis, that's Spanish for beer. I hope you can make the connection. So anyway, the cervasis jab as well. So DEI is also part of the budget, right? Safe space by using the correct pronouns, as I said already. But also there are tons of other crazy things in there, like indefinite detention. There's so many issues, and all of it is put under the same umbrella of, well, this is for national defense. At the same time, there are so many problems in the military, the mental health issues, the suicide rate. If you didn't know, the suicide rate of, former active military people comes close to one person per hour every day of the year, and it goes down a little bit some years. And I recently checked the numbers, and so it comes down a little bit, but then it goes right back up. But to have this such a high suicide rate should be a signal to all of us that something is wrong here. Something strange is happening. I knew someone who did his one of his medical rotations. To become a doctor, you have to do some time in various different types of hospitals, and he did a rotation at a veterans hospital. I won't say which, but he said that the whole time he was there, he never saw a patient, right? And we know, if you live in America, you know that all the veterans are trying to get proper health care, right? Especially from all the medical health problems that come up as a result of serving overseas. Well, while he was there, he never saw a patient. And instead, his responsibility was putting all of the people who came in seeking treatment, to put them all on hospice. And hospice is basically that state where there's nothing more that you can do for you, you're going to die. People who are listed on hospice and then pass away, there's no sort of investigation, there's no autopsy, because it's assumed, well, we know why you died. And so instead of providing treatment, all of these doctors are being, that was his experience. I don't know if that's only because he was doing rotations, whether the real doctors or the full doctors, no longer in training doctors, are actually seeing patients. I don't know. All I know is that his experience was that he never saw any patients, and all he did was put people's names on hospice. So while they passed away, awaiting care, there's no investigation, right? And that is just crazy. So we're spending these billions and billions of dollars sending them overseas and not even taking care of the people who come back. It's just insane. I don't get it. There are lots of stories I won't get into. Obviously, I just don't have time, but they're horror stories. And if you start investigating or just researching some of the stories behind some of these suicides, it's just absolutely mind-boggling. Anyway, so to have all of these woke programs teaching DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the military, it teaches discrimination, right? So the weird thing is that people are trying to eradicate discrimination, but the way they do it is by teaching discrimination, except they say this is the correct way to discriminate. And I don't know if you remember or if you heard the episode, but I talked about how a lot of schools here in the United States, the public schools, government-run schools, try to teach all of the students who went there, how to be tolerant. In other words, we're going to eradicate racism by teaching people how to be tolerant of other people, especially people of other races. But, from the outset, I thought that this was ridiculous. And I made sure to make a point to all of my classes that when you try to teach tolerance, you are essentially teaching intolerance, right? Because you're telling people this is the way you have to be tolerant, which implies that if you don't do this, you are intolerant. And now you're giving permission to people to go after those people perceived as intolerant. And it is not, if you listen to the things that certain rioters, woke people say, it's exactly that. They're taking language from all of this tolerance training and turning it into violence. I hate when I'm right, but there it is. So the DEI programs also, they're teaching racism, they're teaching discrimination. So it's not an exaggeration of opponents to make those claims. So, but the problem we're having, what we should be seeing here, is that the military really should not be concerned with the kind of discrimination that DEI teaches. In other words, the military is designed to kill people, all right? And so you want to train people to kill other people. Now, not everyone can do this, and not everyone in the military is supposed to do this either, although everyone is supposed to, theoretically. But you got band members and the people who play in the band, people who are cooks, people who are clerks, right? Mechanics, police. And so they're not necessarily, their primary function is not necessarily to kill other people. But if you look at the combat troops, they have to be trained to kill people. And so what kind of person makes a good killer? I don't know, right? I think they can come from all walks of life. It's not restricted to gender. I've known some, and it is known that women make better shooters than men. Women, did I say that right? Women make better shooters than men. My wife no longer is a better shot than me, but nevertheless, there it is, right? Initially, when we started, she was a much better shooter than I was. But so it's not tied to, so you're going to discriminate to find those characteristics that makes your military an effective killing, fighting machine, not what their gender is, not what their sexuality is, not any of these other things, right? You are going to select people based on their ability to function as a fighting machine. Now imagine, and so not to do that reduces the effectiveness and the ability of your military to perform the function that it's supposed to, and that is defend and kill. Imagine like football, whether it's European soccer football or football in America, it doesn't matter. There are certain skills that you need in order to be able to help your team be competitive. If all of a sudden you say, we're going to ignore this, we're going to be all about diversity, equity, and inclusion, well, then that will not guarantee that you will field a really, really good team. And that's the problem, right? It becomes mediocre. You bring down the talent level, the viewability, the watchability of these sports, right? And it ruins it. And so in the same way, the military will be ruined in the same way. What's worse is that the leadership in the military also, I've heard rumors and there's indication that a lot of the generals and the leaders are all about kissing up to and sucking up to whatever the leadership is saying because they want promotions. I heard, was it like full colonel or lieutenant colonel is the highest rank you can achieve without politics. And after that, everything promotions is all about politics. And so if you look on the news, the more sane commentators on war and military policy, like Colonel Douglas McGregor, it's colonel. Colonel is the highest rank they achieve, because beyond that, it's all political. And if you're not going to toe the party line, then you don't get the promotion. You're just forced into retirement. And this is unfortunate. So you're going to have people who are less capable in tactics in fighting a war than you have leaders who are more are going to discriminate in the acceptable kind of way. And so therefore your fighting force is less effective. And a lot of people in America don't realize this, and they don't realize that the military cannot compete and run with other militaries of the world because they're too concerned about pronouns rather than fighting. And this is bad. So you want to, again, to put a point on it, you want to discriminate for the characteristics that you want for the task that you have. This is the case for everything. If your company is engineering, you want the best engineers, right? The best, no matter what other characteristics, whatever racializations they may have. All you want is the engineering ability. We talked about this with the movie Hidden Figures. It doesn't matter what the color or the gender of the person is. You want someone who is able to crunch numbers quickly. The downside of this also is that if you have these quotas, there are not enough people to go around. If you mandate, and this is why it's so great that affirmative action has finally come to an end in the United States, is because you don't have enough people to fill all the spots. If every company, every school, every organization needs to fulfill a minimum number of colored people, for example, in their workforce, there are not enough of them to go around. And this becomes a problem. So now you're going to simply hire underqualified people simply to satisfy your quota. This is bad for efficiency, productivity, cost of production, costs for your company, because now you have dead weight on your roles. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that if you do this, you're going to have bad workers. No, they'll just won't be the best. And in competition, you need to have the best, just like football, professional football. If you are going to discriminate for things not associated with the sport, then your team is going to suffer. The same is true for your corporation, for your school, for your military, it does for your government, for God's sake. Also, by fixating on certain issues, a lot of other issues pass us by without us even really knowing, like the Cyber Information Sharing Act, CISA, I guess that's what it's called, I don't know. But while everyone is so fixated on the NDAA, Congress passed the Cyber Information Sharing Act, which is basically a snooping bill. Now, the government can spy on and have all the information they want on us. So bad policy, bad racializations are funded by the government, right? Not only are they required by law by the government, but the perpetuation of all of this stuff is funded by the government. And when you have this kind of subsidy of bad racializations, right? Bad discrimination, right? So bad discrimination in the sense that, in case you forgot already, you're going to discriminate in favor of political ideology instead of the task at hand, right? So you're going to look for people of color instead of the best football players. You're going to look for certain gender expressions instead of their ability to kill, right, and fight. And so all of this bad policy and bad discrimination, bad racialization is funded by the government. And this cannot continue. It will all collapse. And so what the solution is basically to get government out of it completely, leave organizations alone. The punishment comes when the company is put into bankruptcy because the competition is discriminating correctly. The best example of this would be Moneyball. If you haven't seen the movie Moneyball, which is about the Oakland Athletics baseball team here in the United States, in the way they would recruit players was by how they looked and how good looking was their spouse. I mean, really crazy racializations were determining the recruitment process. And then this guy from Yale, he knows sabermetrics, right? Because baseball is a statistics-driven sport. And based on the statistics, put together a team that almost won the World Series, right? And so what you want is organizations to be left alone to try to figure out better ways to have the best people working for them. And when you have that, you can be more efficient, you can cut down expenses, plus you generate the competition needed for people and companies to innovate, to come up with better ways of doing the same thing. And my theory is that if you push it hard enough, then you will realize that things like war and military are a waste of time and money, but rather focusing on how to promote peace reduces our need for spending all this money in military projects and military adventurism. So that's it for this episode. I will see you in the next one.